Hello again. Again, my name is Jon Kilroy. I'm going to talk about staying productive with Ember and Elide. A little bit about me. Worked at this company in all of its iterations for 11 years. I know, I almost feel like a gray beard. One company, 11 years. I started off as a back-end pipeline engineer. We did our own custom MapReduce, worked on Hadoop, then I worked on some web services, and now I lead a team where we're building analytic web apps. So yeah, Happy New Year, everyone. I know it's the end of January, but you've probably seen articles like this, like how to be a hottie in 2019, right? Or you just need to follow these 8 things and you'll be 10x more productive, right? I don't really buy into that much, but I'm trying something new this year. I'm using Todoist, and I set up some goals for myself for 2019. One is to read 5 books. I read 4 books, so I'm upping it this year. I want to learn a new song on the piano. I want to give a tech talk. There we are. And I want to do some stuff in my basement. Everyone loves to be productive, right? We want to ship as developers. We want to ship that great feature to our customers. We want to squash bugs. We want to win in our product, right? And I'm not going to give you 10 steps how to be more productive as a developer. What I want to start off with is what inhibits our productivity. First thing is just not knowing how to do things, right? If you don't know how to code, I don't know what to tell you, learn how to code. But for developers, we'll face things like, I'm new to this code base. How do I navigate it? How do I find out where things are laid out? How do I run code? How do I test it? What are the conventions of this technology? How do I know what's idiomatic JavaScript for this framework? Does my team even align with some of these conventions? Are we always fighting through PRs? Like, should we use underscores? Should we use kebabs, camel case, right? Use Prettier, everyone. Just use Prettier. That'll help a lot. Are there good docs? Can I find what do I need to do to make this technology work? Another thing is not having a design, right? When you get a task, if you're doing Scrum, you're like, I want to pull down this task. If it doesn't have a design, you have to stop, think about what you're doing, and design it out, right? And so designs are necessary, but they take time. In JavaScript, there's so many technologies that you can choose from, right? And so you go through the analysis and say, hey, is this a good choice? Is this a good choice? And maybe your choice that you did today might not be the greatest choice down the road. Not testing your work, right? If you're just throwing over the wall and throwing it into prod, you're probably going to have to spend some cycles, fixing those bugs. Here in Champaign, we don't have dedicated QA teams. And so what we do is we do all of our own tests and through automation. So when we basically go from PR into master to prod, then we do different testing cycles. So you have to make sure you test your work before you throw it out. Otherwise, you're just going to be wasting your time. Writing things from scratch, right? Again, NPM has so many libraries that we can choose from. We can really be productive by choosing these off-the-shelf solutions. Not having the right tools, right? How frustrating it is when you don't know how to debug something, or you don't know how to test it, or you don't know how to find out, what's this performance problem? Let me find out the characteristics of my rendering engine, right? Lastly, integrations. Integrations are tough, right? Team A says, I'm going to give you foo and bar, and the other team, let's hope they do that, right? Lots of times when we have cross-component, cross-team integrations, they don't work day one. I find that usually it takes a few cycles for that to actually come together. And if you're cross-team, then you have communication issues, right? Maybe you don't align together and you have to go back and forth, and what's the best solution here? So I'm going to talk to you now about how we build apps. And I'm not going to tell you that we don't have any of those problems. They definitely show up. But over the last 4 years, we've built patterns to help eliminate and mitigate some of these issues. So the pattern. So most of our apps look something like this. So here at Yahoo, we're dealing with billions of events and records. So we usually get a fire hose of data. We drop it into a Hadoop cluster. There we process it, we clean it, and we'll throw it into some analytics smart like Presto, Druid, Hive. And we'll put a web service in front of that so that applications can pull out of that. We'll usually store other types of data like lookups for dimensional data or user-created data in something like MySQL or HBase, key value store. And to access that data, we use a framework called Elide, which we're going to talk about tonight. And then we'll build an app, typically an SPA in Ember. We also do some React. So yeah, I'm going to focus on this area. So Ember.JS, a framework for ambitious web developers. That's what they say. And so you're probably saying, if you know about Ember, this is what you're thinking right now. I know what you're thinking. You're going to say, Ember.JS? OK, Grandpa, how old is that framework? This is actually my dad, and he is a grandfather. And he does not use JavaScript or Ember, but he's a happy guy. Yeah, Ember is 7 years old. It's a dinosaur, right? And this is what a 7-year-old looks like right here. Really into Ghostbusters back when I was 7. It's interesting, though, because if you look at the technologies 7 years ago that were popular, most of them have died off. No one's really using them. Or they're not really moving forward. They're in maintenance mode. But Ember is still there. And if you look at the growth rate of Ember, Larry Voss from NPM did an analysis of all the frameworks. And in JSConf 2018, he said that Ember is actually seeing healthy growth. Now, it's not, it's not a React, but it's actually eating into React's market share, as is Vue. So we know people are using Ember. Quite a few large companies are. But why is it still around? Why are we still talking about Ember in 2019? 3 words, OK? It sparks joy. You guys know the show? No, in all honesty, it's about, I believe, its community really appreciates the goals and values. So Yehuda Katz, the co-creator of the framework, said, I don't care for the biggest framework. We just want to have the biggest set of opinions in JS. And what that means is if you're bought into Ember, that means you're constrained to a certain way of building apps. But that way of building apps is to allow you to just focus on what makes your app great. And so its values is providing this shared abstraction, kind of crowdsourcing strong opinions on how you build an app that let you eliminate decisions, again, to help free you up and to be more productive. It also really buys into convention over configuration, so we don't have to wire up every aspect of our app. Great tooling is at the forefront of Ember. Because apps are built a certain way and they all pretty much look the same, we can optimize our tooling and not have to make certain assumptions. Or we can make certain assumptions. We don't have to build these general tools. And Ember really cares about testing. And it has a great test story. It always has. So you're not going to get the hottest features once they land in browsers, but you'll get the best curated ideas. And if a feature is really useful and helpful to a large amount of people, Ember will bring it in. And this is what Ember calls stability without stagnation. It's interesting because a lot of the Ember apps that were built 4 or 5 years ago are still there and kept up with every Ember iteration. And unlike other frameworks, they didn't have to rewrite everything. So Ember has a 6-week release cycle and an LTS version. So you get security patches for a year. So in its ecosystem, one of the biggest pillars is the Ember CLI. It's one of the first of its kind. Vue and Angular took a lot of ideas from it. This is our build pipeline. This is the way we install libraries called add-ons that are optimized for Ember. If you want auto prefixer, you just got to npm install it auto-wired into your build system. You don't have to touch a lick of Webpack or anything. This is where we have generators to do common scaffolding, test runner, development, hot reloading, and even updates. This is really cool, is code mods. So I did an update from Ember 3 to 3.1 to 3.7. It went through all my code and gave me the latest conventions, latest libraries, and everything. I did a PR. It's like 1,200 lines. I got reviewed and merged in a day. So we're talking a lot about the ecosystem. Let's talk about some of the basics. It's interesting because it's, we heard about Vue, and Ember isn't that different in a lot of ways. Ember comes with a router, and a router maps a URL to a route object. That route object is responsible for fetching the data for that route. And usually that data is a model. A model is just a schema of a resource. We have controllers. They hold state for that route. This is kind of where we configure query params. Services are objects that are cross-cutting logic, like a notification service or a location service that can just go across any type of route or component. And components. And if it's 2019, you don't know what a component is, then you haven't been doing JavaScript recently. But it's basically a logical set of content and behavior. All right. So this is what it looks like at a high level. You have a URL that's like rentals. So I need to pull all my rental data. So the router invokes the route handler for rentals. The route handler says, Ember data, give me all the records for rentals. It fetches that. And then it invokes the top level template, the insertion point, so you can render your component tree. And I mentioned Ember data. Again, Ember data lets you model your resources. And it's this abstraction that you can work with that says, I want to fetch rentals from the store. The store will see if it has it locally cached. If not, it's going to go to an adapter that you can wire up and connect to local storage, XHR, XML, JSON, whatever you want, pull it back, deserialize into an object, and then give it to your route and template layers for rendering. And so this is some of the contracts you have. You can create records. This is basic CRUD. So right, you can create them, and you can read them. You can fetch them a collection as individual one, update, delete. You can also roll back. All right, so that's Ember. That's one of the technologies we use. We also use Elide. Now, has anyone heard of Elide here? That doesn't work at the company? No one. OK, right. So Elide is, I think, is a really well-kept secret, and it's a gem. I should say I think it's pretty special. It allows you to set up a persistence API very quickly. Again, has very strong opinions and is built around conventions. So I have a confession about Elide. This is a JavaScript meetup, but Elide is built on the JVM. Now here at Oath, we do all our big data processing in the JVM, so it really made sense for us to do it in Java. I'm going to use Kotlin. It's a little bit more of a modern language for the JVM. A lot of Android developers use it. So let's get started. So I said 4 simple steps. That's also what the website says. Is first you define a model. And this is a schema of one of your resources. So we're going to be describing a post for like a blog. So what does a blog have? It has an ID, it has a title, it has a body, and it has this relationship. So a blog has an author, and so it has a many-to-one relationship with the user. This tells Elide how to respond to requests. It also tells its data store layer how to query out of a database. Elide has security out of the box. So with these annotations, they look kind of like decorators, you can specify who can read what at the object level, at the field level. This person can read it, this person can update it, this person can delete it. And these expressions can be composed with ands and ors. So it's really expressive. Then you expose it. You can say this is a top-level entity, or this is an entity that can only be accessed through another one. For instance, I have to go through user 1 to get all of its blog posts, or no, I can go to / blog posts or posts. Lastly, you deploy, and it's up and running. It supports computed attributes. So if your database has a first name and a last name, this can combine it to get full name. It supports lifecycle hooks. So let's say you created a new user in your system and you want to send them a welcome email. You can do this with a lifecycle hook. You have 2 options here. It speaks GraphQL, which is really hot right now. And it also speaks JSON API, which is an interesting name because it's actually a specification for building APIs in JSON. And what it turns out is that, oh yeah, you can also deploy both at the same time. But it turns out that Ember Data has out-of-the-box support for JSON API. So that adapter that I talked about, you don't have to write it. It's already built. And we're going to see how those two integrate. So just real quickly, what does JSON API kind of look like? This is the content type. But this is a basic structure. So if I want to get a specific user, I'll go to /user/1. And my return, my payload has a type, it has an ID, it has all the attributes and all the relationships. JSON API supports complex filtering. So I'm filtering for all the posts that have a title like blog. You can fetch related entities in one fell swoop. So I want to get all the users and all of its blog entries. You can fetch also specific fields. So I don't need the actual text of my blog. I just want the title. You can do that as well. All right. So these are two technologies that have strong opinions. They're built on convention. So I feel like to really show you the ergonomics and how you can build apps very quickly, we're just going to build an app. And I already told you I want to read 5 books. It's actually quite an investment for read a book. So I research them a lot. I probably spent too much time researching what is a good book. And to be honest, I don't want just a good book. I want a great book. So what we're going to build is a Goodreads clone. I have a lot of code here, I'm going to be honest. But I just kind of want to show you at a high level what's going on and how that these tools can really help you be productive. So hold on to your butts. All right, so let's build the web service. There is no CLI to get you bootstrapped, unfortunately. But I hope to change that in 2019. For now, we're just going to initialize Gradle. It's kind of like npm init, kind of. I'm going to add the dependency to my build. I'm going to do a basic main function. It's going to set the port, tell Elide. I'm going to add a chorus filter. It's going to tell Elide where models are and any of the security settings I have. And then it's just going to launch. This is some basic database configuration. I'm just using H2. It's an in-memory database. It's really good for testing. But this is where it gets interesting, right? So I'm going to build a user. This is just a POCO, plain old Kotlin object, with some annotations that come from the JPI spec. So we're going to call this an entity, and we're going to tell Elide what the ID field is. It's called Elide. We're going to have a name field, which is a string, and then that relationship of reviews, which is a set of review objects. And here you can also put validations right in. So it's very declarative. I can open up this file and see exactly my schema. Not too different is our review object. Again, ID. I have an ISBN. This is the review. This is the book ID for what I'm reviewing. I have a rating. It's a float between 0 and 5. I have some text and a back reference to user. That's it. That's all the code you need to set this up. It's battle tested. It's used all over this company, and we haven't had it. Just really scales. And so when you set it up, you'll get something like this, right? All right. So that was our API. That was pretty quick. The client, we're going to use Ember CLI. We're going to boot it up with Ember new book API. It's going to give you a lot of files off the bat. Editor config, ESLint, Travis build, all this stuff is done for you, all curated for you. The design of our app. So Ember is going to kind of guide us here. We're going to have 4 routes. We're going to have our index route. It's going to redirect just to a list view of reviews. If you want to look at a specific review, it's reviews / that ID, and then reviews / new is where we're going to build a new review. And the way Ember works is that when you have subroutes, they actually nest into each other at the template layer. All right, so let's create some routes. Again, routes are in charge of pulling data for that specific route. So we're going to build the routes with Ember G for generate. And when we do this, it's going to create a JS file for our routes, and it's going to put it in the right directory, so it's auto-wired. It's going to build a template, again, in the right directory, auto-wired. It's going to update our router. Our router is a map of all the routes in the system, and it's going to create a test, so we can hit the ground running with tests. This is what the router looks like. Defines, again, all the routes in the system. This was built for me. All right, so we have routes. We need models. So we're going to use the generator functions to create those. And here is our model. And it looks very it looks very similar to what we did in Kotlin. You'll notice here, decorators. You guys are experts now, so you know how this works, right? Thanks to Chad. He's a rock star. So we have @adder that tells Ember this is a persisted attribute and has many defines the relationship of reviews. A user has many reviews. This is the model for reviews. Pretty straightforward: ISBN, rating, text, reviewer. All right, I said that because we're building apps all the same way, we can have great tools. So there's a add-on called Ember CLI Mirage, and it can look up all the models in the system and build a mock for it. It intercepts all the AJAX requests and just gives you back fake responses. And you can build these nice factories. I use that here in my tests. So for the name, I just can use faker.internet.username, and it just generates a random username. Same thing with numbers, and I have some Latin for my reviews. All right, so we have models, we have routes. Let's start fetching data. So at the application layer, the application route, I should say, I need to fetch the user for the system. Here, I made it really simple. I'm just going to get user1. So this.store.findRecord, user, that's the model I want to fetch, user1. And what this does is it's going to, out of the box, talk to Elide, know how to make the right requests, and know how to deserialize the response into an Ember object. I didn't have to write any of that. This is the template. The main thing here is once I have the model, I can use the model in my template. Ember uses handlebars. Actually, it's called HTML bars, and it's a superset of HTML, kind of like what you saw in Vue. And then the outlet here in the main is where I'm going to put my subroutes. So you get something like looks like this. And this is the outlet. All right, so we have our header, we got our footer, we got our outlet set up. Here's reviews. So what's interesting in here is I'm going to pull the model from the application, which is the user, and I'm going to say user.reviews. Ember understands that relationship. It knows how to make the right request down to Elide via JSON API, and again, get a set of reviews. I'm also using a little dependency injection here to get this service called a library. Remember, a service is a cross-cutting function, and this library is basically going to look up all the metadata for the book, like the title, the author, whatnot. So I'm going to fetch all that. I'm using Open Library. It was really simple. There's no application ID. I can just do REST calls. And so let's build that service real quick. So again, we're going to use the generator. It's going to plop the files in the right place. And for little quick lookups, I could use Ember data, but a lot of times these, with type ahead, it's just easier just to fetch it and then throw it away. I don't need to cache it. And so this service is using actually a generator function. I like generator functions because they're cancelable, unlike promises. And again, I'm using a decorator. This is the lookup function. It's weird. They have two APIs. They have one for just looking up ISBN in a query. This is the one that I use to just query by title. And it's kind of cool because it can abort the request. I'll show you that in a second. If you want to know more about generators, async generators, you can check out Ember concurrency. All right. So I have a list of reviews. Here I'm going to just do a for each over each of the models and list out the author and the image and the rating. And so when I do that, it looks something like this. All right. Now let's make a new review. Now instead of fetching a review, I'm going to create a new one. So I'm going to say this.store create record. And the reviewer is the logged in user, right? Reviewer, so I'm going to plop that in. And I'm going to use a technology called Power Select. Everyone has their own select component that they love. Power Select is ranked really well. Ember actually has a way of giving it a 1 out of 10 score based on GitHub's stars and download rates, and does it have tests? Is it been updated in a while? But anyways, Power Select is a really solid choice. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it my own search logic through the library service. And every time I need to display a book, this is my custom template. And so here is my search task. And this is, again, big shout out to generators, async generators. This is how you do debouncing, timeout 400. If I have a new, if I type something new, it just cancels the task. It's that simple. So this is, I'm going to perform my search task there. And this is when I actually select a book. I'm going to call this set book action and set the ISBN. Then I'm going to save it, model.save. And that's going to post back to Elide. And then I'm going to transition to that specific review. So here's my Power Select with my custom template. You can see I put a little thumbnail with and put the title and author. All right, last route is the reviews route. So this is review / the ID. So if I just want to look up ID1, review /1. I think you guys understand how this works now. I have my library service injected. I do have a path param. So the model hook has been given a path param. So that's the review ID. And I can now go to my store and say, find review ID, 5 or 1, whatever it is. I'm going to use my service that's cross-cutting to decorate it with all the book metadata. And then I'm just going to pass that to my template to render. Now, I made a really simple book review component, just display. But I think what's interesting here is I have these buttons in an if statement. And it says, if the review has dirty attributes, and if it's in the dirty state, show the save button or the revert button. And what by dirty means it's out of sync with the DB. There are changes that have been made. So we only show these buttons if I want to save it, these updates, or if I want to revert back to the DB version. And these are my actions. Set the properties, roll back the attributes, save it. Again, Ember data knows we're talking JSON API, so it's going to send a patch request to Elide. And this is what we got. And we were talking about reactive earlier. Ember data signified, kind of notified the app that it needs to re-render when it goes to the list view. And now I have not just 4 reviews showing, but 5. I told you that Ember really likes tests, so I'm going to show you how you test this whole flow really quickly. I'm going to visit the index route and make sure my current URL redirected to reviews, and that I have the initial state of 4 reviews. I'm going to click on the new button. It's going to bring me to the new route. Ember Power Select is pretty cool. It has these helpers to help you interact with that select component. So I can say select search, and I want to type in The Hobbit, and I want to choose the first one. And so when I do that, I get a new ID for that new review. I want to make sure I was redirected there and that the title is correct. Lastly, when I go back to the index route, I should have 5 reviews. So you can see how easy it is to test in Ember. So that's it. That's it. Just 28 steps, and you have a clone. It's that simple, guys. Can't you see? All right. Thanks for bearing with that. So I'm not going to do a demo. I knew I was going to have time. Maybe. I did put a escape hatch there. And I know this was a little hand-wavy. But what I really want to get at is that these strong opinions and conventions really let me focus on what makes my app special, right? Most of the work was done on the layout. Most of the work was done in my schema. I didn't have to do my build system. I didn't have to write an adapter. I just worked on the special sauce. And so I'm what I hope you get out of this is that using these strong opinions, these guardrails, these proven ways of doing things, you can kind of mitigate some of these productivity inhibitors and work on being a snowflake app. All right, that's all I have. Thank you guys so much.